I knew something was wrong by the way my husband said "we" before I had even set my purse down. It was a Thursday late enough for the kitchen to be turning gold around the edges, the kind of thin dusty light that came through the old glass over the sink and made everything look softer than it really was. I had stopped on the way home for a loaf of rye bread and the blackberries Liam liked with yogurt, and I was still thinking about whether we had enough laundry soap when I heard Denise's voice from inside the house. "Well, if you're going to do it," she said, "you do it before the market shifts again. You don't want to leave money sitting in old wood." Then Liam answered, calm, as always, with that low, even tone that could make almost anything sound reasonable. "I know. We've talked around it long enough." I stopped on the front walk with the grocery bag handles cutting into my fingers. It was such a small sentence. Plenty of wives probably would have walked in without hearing anything wrong in it. Maybe most of them would have been right. But there was something about the settledness of his voice that made the back of my neck go cold. Not what he said exactly. The fact that he sounded like a man continuing a conversation, not starting one. I let myself in quietly. The screen door gave its usual tired snap behind me, and both of them turned toward the sound. Denise was perched on one of the kitchen stools in a cream blouse that cost more than anything in my closet, one ankle crossed over the other, car keys on the counter beside her. Liam stood by the sink with a legal pad in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. My grandmother's old yellow curtains were moving a little above the radiator, and Denise had put her handbag on the ladder-back chair that used to be Grandma Evelyn's seat. That bothered me more than it should have. "There she is," Denise said brightly. "We were just talking about all the potential in this place." Liam gave me a small smile. "Hey." I set the groceries down on the table. Potential for what? Nobody answered right away. Liam took a sip of coffee that had to be stone cold by then. Denise glanced toward the windows, toward the long, narrow kitchen, the original cabinets my grandmother had painted over 3 times in 3 different decades, all of them still faintly visible under the current white. "You know," she said. "Light updates. Better use of the footprint. People are paying ridiculous money now for homes with this kind of character." I looked at Liam. "People," he shrugged like I was making it heavier than it needed to be. "Mom was just saying the neighborhood's changing." That should have been enough. A normal answer to a normal question, but the legal pad in his hand had numbers on it, and one of them had a $sign in front of it. I saw it for half a second before he turned the page over. I wish I could say I got angry then. I wish I was the kind of woman who heard a wrong note and trusted herself immediately. But I had spent most of my life making sure I was not hard to be around. After my mother died when I was 15, people got very kind around me in this careful, breakable way, and then after a while they got tired. Not cruel, just relieved by the version of me that did not need much. The easy daughter, the mature one, the girl who could be counted on, not to add anything else to the room. By 27, that habit lived in my bones. So instead of saying, "Why are you making plans around my house without me?" I took the blackberries out of the bag and asked if anybody wanted coffee reheated. Denise laughed softly. "Honey, I keep telling Liam this kitchen is wasted on people who don't open it up." Liam leaned against the counter. "Mom." What she said. "I'm complimenting the bones." The bones. I hated that phrase. It was always said by people who meant a house only mattered once somebody with taste had corrected it. "This place is fine," I said. Denise smiled at me the way women do when they are trying to be gracious about another woman's limitations. "Of course it is. Nobody said it isn't." Liam finally set the legal pad down face down on the counter. "Nora, don't do that." "Do what? Get tense over nothing." Nothing. My grandmother's house. The house she had left me because, as she told me once while drying dishes with her hands red from hot water, a woman ought to have one thing in this world that answered to her name before anybody else's. At the time, I had rolled my eyes and laughed because I was 22 and in love and sure that kind of sentence belonged to another century. Now I stood in her kitchen with my husband and his mother talking about potential like the house was a tired old aunt with assets. "I'm not tense," I said, which was the kind of lie women tell when they have already started disappearing from a conversation. He came over and kissed the side of my head, just above my temple. Light, automatic, almost brotherly. "We're just thinking out loud." That should have soothed me. It would have once. Instead, it made me feel lonelier. Denise left 20 minutes later, kissing my cheek in the doorway and telling me not to work too hard tomorrow. After she drove away, I put the milk in the fridge and the bread in the bread box and waited for Liam to say something that would make the oddness vanish. He didn't. He wandered into the living room, clicked on the local news, and loosened his tie. I stood at the sink rinsing blackberries under a weak stream of water, looking out at the little square backyard where my grandmother used to hang sheets on a line even in October if there was sun. Finally, I said, "What were the numbers?" He looked over from the couch. "What numbers on the pad?" He was quiet for a second too long. "Just rough estimates." "For what?" He exhaled through his nose. "Nora." "For what?" I asked again. He muted the TV. "I've been trying to think about our future." Something in me tightened. "By making lists with your mother." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, patient already. "By thinking like an adult. We can't live forever like this." Like what I almost asked, but I knew what he meant. The narrow hallways, the single bathroom upstairs, the old windows that stuck in summer. The fact that the neighborhood which had once been ignored was now filling with contractors and neat black fences, and couples who said things like historic charm before gutting everything that gave a place its age. The fact that this house had been mine before it was ours. "We live fine," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and something passed across his face too quick to hold. Tiredness, maybe. Or impatience. "That's exactly what I mean," he said quietly. "Fine. I slept badly that night." Liam came to bed after I did and rolled to his side without touching me except for the dip of the mattress. There had been a time when I could tell how we were by the way he reached for me in sleep. Those first 2 years of marriage, he always found some part of me, my wrist, the back of my shirt, my ankle, under the quilt. Lately, he slept like a careful guest. In the morning, we moved through our usual routine with the polite efficiency of people trying not to brush a bruise. He ate toast standing at the counter. I packed my lunch in the blue container with the cracked lid. The coffee maker made that last choked sputter it always made. On his way out, he kissed my cheek and said, "Let's not make this bigger than it is." I stood in the kitchen after he left, my hand still on the counter. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself Denise always talked too much. I told myself married people discussed money and options and futures, and not every uncomfortable conversation was betrayal in work shoes. By Sunday, I almost believed it again. We drove to Denise's townhouse for lunch because she had bought salmon from Costco and wanted to use it before it turned into an expensive science project. Her dining room smelled like lemon candles and roasted asparagus. She had folded the cloth napkins into little triangles and set out the good plates, the ones with the silver rim she always reminded people were hand wash only. Liam was in a better mood than he had been all week. He opened the wine, made Denise laugh, touched the back of my chair as he passed. If somebody had taken a photograph of us, we would have looked like a perfectly manageable family. Halfway through lunch, Denise set down her fork and said, "I was telling Sharon about your neighborhood, and she said the hospital expansion has people buying 2 streets over already." I kept my eyes on my plate. "I've heard that. It would be foolish not to at least think ahead," she said. Liam took a sip of wine and said, "That's all I've been trying to do." There was that word again. Trying. The word people use when they want credit before consent. I said, "There's a difference between thinking ahead and talking like something's already decided." Denise looked at Liam, not at me, and smiled tightly. "See, this is what I mean. She hears one practical conversation and acts like we're stealing floorboards." Liam gave a short, embarrassed laugh. Not cruel. Almost affectionate. That made it worse. "Nora gets emotional about this house," he said. "You know how she is." The room went very still for me after that, not for them. Denise just made a soft, sympathetic face and reached for the butter dish. Somewhere outside, somebody started a leaf blower. A car door slammed down the street. Liam kept eating. You know how she is. I'd heard versions of that my whole life. After my mother died, and I could not stop crying in the grocery store because she had always bought the wrong brand of pasta on purpose just to annoy me. My aunt had put a hand on my shoulder and murmured to the cashier, "She's had a hard year." At 19, when I turned down a beach trip because it was the weekend of my mother's birthday, my cousin said, "You know how Nora gets around anniversaries. It was never exactly unkind. That was the trick. It was how people made room for your pain without leaving you any dignity inside it." I set my napkin beside my plate. "How I am." Liam finally looked at me. "That's not what I meant. It sounded like what you meant." He was already wearing that expression I hated most now, the one that made him look like the reasonable one in a scene I had created. "I'm saying you're attached to it." Denise jumped in with her silky, calming voice. "There's nothing wrong with attachment, sweetheart. But sometimes attachment keeps women from making smart decisions." Women. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because if I stayed 1 second longer, I was either going to cry or say something sharp enough to make me the problem by dessert. On the drive home, Liam kept one hand at the top of the steering wheel and the other on the console between us. "You embarrassed me," he said finally. I turned toward the window. The maples along the boulevard were just starting to go red at the edges. I embarrassed you. You got quiet and cold over a conversation. A conversation about my house. Our house, he said automatically, then corrected himself. Too late. I mean, our life. I said nothing after that. At home, he went upstairs to take a work call. I stood in the kitchen for a while looking at the fruit bowl, the mail, the old clock above the back door. Then I opened the junk drawer looking for a roll of tape to repair the corner of the lunch container lid. That was when I found the card. It was wedged between 2 takeout menus and a packet of rubber bands, cream-colored thick, the kind of card meant to feel expensive. A lending office 2 neighborhoods over. On the back in Liam's slanted handwriting were 4 short lines. Refi options, equity use faster, if unified title ad. I stood there with the drawer open against my hip and the card in my hand, reading the last line over and over until the words stopped looking like handwriting and started looking like intention. I stood there so long with the card in my hand that I heard Liam's footsteps on the stairs before I remembered how to move. I slid it under the stack of takeout menus just as he came into the kitchen, still holding his phone, his tie loosened now, his face carrying the mild blankness he always wore after work calls. He went to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, twisted the cap and drank half of it without looking at me. For 1 second I almost said nothing. That was the oldest reflex in me. Not cowardice exactly, more like a lifetime of trying to delay pain by leaving it unnamed. If I did not ask, he could not lie. If he did not lie, maybe this was still some smaller thing. Maybe the card had been picked up at random. Maybe title ad meant something I did not understand. Maybe all marriages had these ugly little practical corners nobody talked about in public. Then I heard Denise's voice from lunch again. Sometimes attachment keeps women from making smart decisions. I reached into the drawer, took the card back out and laid it on the counter between us. What's this? Liam glanced down. His expression did not change much, but not changing was its own kind of answer. Where did you find that? In the kitchen drawer. He set the water bottle down. I forgot I put it there. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck, already halfway annoyed that I had made him explain himself. It's nothing, Nora. I stopped in there a couple weeks ago because I was in the area. I asked a few general questions. About adding your name to my title. He let out a breath through his nose. You're doing that thing where you go straight to the most loaded version. It says, title ad. It says question mark. I stared at him. That should not have hurt as much as it did, but there was something unbearable about the little grammar of it. The casualness. The idea that he could wave away the whole thing with punctuation, like my body had not gone cold at lunch. Like his mother had not just spent a week talking about my house as if it were a stubborn piece of underperforming stock. So you asked about refinancing too, I said. I asked what options people usually look at if they want to improve a property and build equity. People. Always people. Generic floating people who never seemed to include me until it was time for the consequences. You said you were only thinking out loud. I was. You wrote it down. His mouth tightened. I don't understand what you want from me right now. That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so familiar. My mother used to say that some people ask a question only after they have already decided the answer will be unreasonable. Liam had a cleaner version of the same habit. He could make the other person's injury sound like poor communication. I want to know why you're asking how to add yourself to the title of a house that is in my name. He looked at me for a long time like he was deciding which version of the truth would cost him least. Because I'm your husband, he said finally. Because married people make plans together. Because I'm tired of living like I'm renting my own life. There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, but honest enough to make my stomach drop. My own life. The house around us suddenly felt very narrow. I could hear the old clock over the back door ticking. I could hear a dog barking somewhere behind the alley fence. I could hear the refrigerator motor kick on and think absurdly, that sound has been here longer than my marriage. You're not renting your life, I said. He gave me a look that was almost pitying. Nora, come on. And there it was again, worse than the rest of it. The tone that suggested reality itself was getting tiresome in my hands. I folded my arms across my stomach because I felt as if I had been opened there. So, what was the plan? You ask enough questions until I stop saying no. I didn't say that. You didn't say much of anything until I found the card. His eyes hardened then just a little. Not rage. Liam almost never raised his voice. That was part of what had made our marriage feel safe at first. I met him 6 months after college when I was still in that shaky stage of grief where everyone kept praising me for functioning. He had seemed so steady, so undemanding. He listened. He remembered details. He once drove 40 minutes to bring me soup when I had the flu and sat on my apartment floor assembling a broken IKEA shelf because my mother had been the one who used to do practical things with me, and after she died, I never quite learned how not to feel ashamed asking for help. I had loved him partly because he never made me feel like too much. Now I wondered if what he had really liked was how little I demanded in return. "You're twisting this," he said. "I'm trying to think long-term and you're acting like I forged your signature." The words landed hard because they reached for absurdity on purpose. Make me sound dramatic, and suddenly his behavior returned to the safe middle of things. I picked the card back up. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked away first. "Because every time I bring up anything about this house you shut down." For a second I almost believed him. That was the worst part. He always spoke nearest to the truth when he wanted to drag me somewhere false. Had I shut down? Sometimes yes. But shutting down was not the same thing as agreeing. Silence was not permission. Hurt was not inefficiency. "I need some air," I said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course you do." I put the card in my pocket and walked out before I could answer that. I drove nowhere for 20 minutes and ended up without deciding to, in the grocery store parking lot where my mother used to buy flowers too late in the week after the good ones were gone. I sat with the engine running and thought about how many years of my life had been built around being understandable. Easy, fair, not making people carry my feelings for me. Even when my grandmother left me the house at 24 after a stroke took her so quickly she never got to turn into the old woman people warn you about, I had spent the first month apologizing for inheriting it. To cousins who had nicer incomes. To an uncle who said he was thrilled for me in the voice people use when they are not. Even to Liam, who kissed my forehead and said, "You don't have to feel guilty for having something solid." Something solid. The next morning, before work, I pulled the estate box down from the top shelf of the hall closet. It was a plain banker's box with Evelyn Bennett written on the side in Mara Devlin's neat block lettering. Inside were copies of the deed tax records, a survey map, the will, and all the loose grim paperwork that follows death around like a cleanup crew. At the bottom was the old manila envelope Grandma used to keep important things in. Even before I opened it, I smelled cedar and dust and her face powder, though I knew that was memory putting perfume on paper. When she had first taken me to Mara's office, I was too numb to understand half of what was being said. Grandma had already been gone 3 days. I remember the radiator hissing in the lawyer's waiting room and a bowl of peppermints on a side table, and Mara herself leaning over the desk taking off her glasses to explain that Evelyn had been very clear, very organized, and very determined. "Your grandmother did not like ambiguity," she had said, almost smiling. At the time that sentence had felt like comfort. Now it felt like instruction. I went through the papers slowly. Liam was already at work. The house was quiet except for the washing machine in the basement and the occasional crack from the old floorboards settling. I found the deed copy. I found the property tax statements. I found the insurance renewal. There was no reason any of it should have made me cry, but halfway through the folder my throat closed anyway. Not because of the house exactly, because I could feel the shape of my own delay. Every small moment I'd smoothed over. Every time Liam had said practical and I had swallowed the sting because I did not want to be the kind of wife who made everything emotional. Every time Denise had said we and I had let politeness stand where a boundary should have been. I found Mara's card clipped to the inside pocket of the folder. I stared at it for a full minute before I called. Her receptionist said she could fit me in late that afternoon if I did not mind coming by after regular appointments. I said yes too quickly, as if hesitating would return me to the version of my life where I still did not know what question I was asking. All day at work, I moved through student emails and transfer forms like someone walking through shallow water. A girl in a denim jacket cried in my office because her financial aid had not posted, and she was afraid she would lose her classes, and I sat with her and spoke softly and found the right contact and fixed what I could. It struck me not kindly that I could be so clear about strangers' panic and so fogged inside my own life. Mara's office was in a 2-story brick building downtown above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon by 4 o'clock. She looked almost exactly the same as she had 3 years earlier, same silver-brown bob, same navy sheath dress, same deliberate calm. When she came into the little conference room with my file in one hand, she stopped for half a beat, studying my face with the kind of professional discretion that notices everything and performs none of it. "Nora," she said gently. "It's good to see you, though. I'm guessing not for a good reason." I tried to smile and did not quite manage it. She sat down across from me. "Tell me what you need." So I told her as cleanly as I could. The card, the notes, the lunch, The sudden language around improvements in equity and title. I did not overstate anything. I did not cry. I heard myself and thought, if this sounds small to her, I will have nowhere left to stand. Mara listened with her fingers folded over the file. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she took off her glasses. That was when I knew. A few weeks ago, she said my office did get an exploratory call about your property. The room seemed to lose sound around the edges. I kept my hands in my lap because if I moved them, they would shake. From who I'm not comfortable giving you a direct name if I can't verify who was on the line beyond how they identified themselves. She paused, but the questions were framed as though there was interest in understanding what steps would be involved in bringing a spouse onto title and what that might mean for flexibility later if the property were improved or sold. My face went hot all at once. He said nothing concrete happened. Nothing was filed. Mara said carefully, that part would be true. But this was not the kind of casual call people make because they're curious in the abstract. The questions were specific. I looked at the file in front of her and had the terrible childish urge to ask whether my grandmother had somehow known this would happen, as if dead women could leave not just houses but shields. Mara seemed to read something in my face. Nora, I'm going to be careful here because I don't know your marriage and I'm not interested in inflaming anything. But I remember your grandmother very well. She wanted that house to remain yours unless you chose otherwise with full understanding. Chose otherwise. The phrase hurt more than anything else because it made clear what had been slipping away, not the house yet, the choosing. Mara pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and wrote down in brief what she was willing to summarize about the call date, general subject. No formal action taken, questions, presumed spousal alignment. She slid the page across the table. I thought you should hear this from someone who isn't trying to sell you anything, she said. I looked at the note until the handwriting blurred. When I finally stood to leave, my legs felt detached from the rest of me. Mara walked me to the door and touched my elbow lightly. Facts first, she said. Feelings can follow, but don't let anyone use your feelings to take the place of facts. Outside, the air had turned cold in that sudden Midwestern way, like somebody had opened a door to a different month. I got into my car and shut the door and laid Mara's note on the passenger seat beside my purse. Then I sat there with both hands on the wheel and saw the whole thing in one hard line. Liam sleeping with his body turned away from mine. Liam talking about our future as if I were a delay in it. Liam letting his mother call my attachment foolish. Liam asking questions about title without me. Liam telling me I embarrassed him. Liam saying he was tired of renting his own life. I had spent months grieving a marriage I thought was slipping out of my hands, but that was not what this was. He did not want freedom from me, he wanted freedom from needing my yes. I stayed in the car until the windshield started to fog, not because I did not know what I was going to do. By then I knew with a clarity so clean it almost felt cold. I stayed because I understood that once I went home I would be crossing a line I'd spent most of my life trying not to reach. There is a kind of woman people forgive easily in families like mine. The patient one, the flexible one, the one who can be hurt as long as she stays understandable. I had been understandable for years. It had not protected me from anything. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the porch light had come on automatically in the early dark. The house looked the way it always had from the street narrow plane. The siding needing paint in 2 spots near the back corner, one upstairs curtain hanging a little lower because the rod never sat straight. Nothing about it suggested conflict. That was the strange thing. The places that witness the worst truths rarely announce themselves. Liam's car was already there. I sat for a second with my hand on the gear shift and looked at the front window, the faint movement of his shadow crossing the living room wall. Then I took Mara's note, the lending card, and the estate folder from the passenger seat and went inside. He was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, opening a pasta jar. Domestic enough to make me almost laugh. There you are, he said. I texted. I set my bag down on the chair by the back door. I was busy. He glanced at my face and paused. Did you go somewhere after work? Yes. He screwed the lid back onto the sauce jar and leaned against the counter. Nora, I don't want us doing that thing where we spend 12 hours building separate stories in our heads. For the first time in a long time, I heard him clearly. Not just the words, the structure. He always moved fast to shared language when he wanted to get ahead of meaning. Us. We. Separate stories. As if reality were already a matter of style. I took the papers out and laid them on the kitchen table one by one. The old manila deed envelope with my grandmother's writing on it. Mara's note on the yellow sheet. The cream-colored lending card with his handwriting on the back. The page I had found under the legal pad after he left that morning, folded in half near the microwave with rough numbers for a window replacement, kitchen opening, projected resale estimate. Liam looked at the table, then at me. What is this? Dinner can wait. Something in my voice must have told him this was not another version of our recent circling. He came to the table more slowly. I pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down. I wanted to be seated for this. I wanted the house at my back. He stayed standing. Nora. I went to see Mara Devlin. His face changed then. Not much. Just enough. A flicker around the eyes, a tightening at one corner of his mouth. If I had still been the woman I was a week earlier, I might have missed it. I might have wanted to miss it. Instead, I watched it settle over him like a mask being adjusted. Why would you do that? Because I finally wanted facts more than peace. I thought it, but what I said was, because I found a card in my kitchen drawer asking how to put your name on my title. He exhaled, frustrated now. You are making this into something it isn't. No, I said. I'm making it into what it is. He gave a short, incredulous laugh and dragged out a chair. Okay, fine, let's do this. What exactly do you think is happening? The old script. Say it out loud and make it sound hysterical. I looked at the papers, not at him, because I wanted sequence more than emotion. I think I said that your mother started talking about this house like it was sitting there waiting to be improved and used. I think you let her. Then I think you joined her. Then when I reacted like the owner of the house and not the obstacle to it, the two of you turned that into a problem with my feelings. His jaw shifted. That is not fair. I'm not done. He leaned back in the chair, folding his arm. That little performance of patience he wore when he wanted to signal that somebody else was becoming difficult. I almost lost my nerve then, not because he frightened me, but because some old part of me still wanted to make sure I was being accurate enough to deserve my own anger. Then my eyes landed on my grandmother's writing on the envelope, the hard, blue strokes of Evelyn Bennett, and something steadied in me. You told me the card was casual, I said. You told me it was questions. You told me nothing concrete happened. Mara confirmed that someone asked specific questions about adding a spouse to title and preserving flexibility for later sale. Nobody filed anything. But the call was real. He looked at the yellow page, then away. Exploratory questions aren't a crime. I know. I kept my voice level. That's part of what makes this so ugly. He stared at me. I slid the landing card toward him with one finger. This says title ad. That says question mark. I nodded once. Yes, I remember. That line was almost impressive. He flinched, then not at volume because I still had none but at contempt. I had never let him hear it before. He sat up straighter. I was trying to think ahead. We are married. Married people use assets to build a future. Assets. I let the word sit there. That's exactly the word. What is that supposed to mean? It means you stopped talking about this house like it was my grandmother's and started talking about it like it was trapped value. And when I didn't smile and call that maturity, you started treating me like a woman who can't handle reality. That is not what I did. It is exactly what you did. He shook his head, angry now in that controlled way I used to mistake for restraint. You are so determined to make yourself the injured party that you can't hear anything practical without turning it into betrayal. For a second the old reflex rose in me, hot and automatic. Explain yourself. Soften it, prove you are reasonable. I felt it come and felt it stop. No, I said quietly. What I hear is when practicality only ever seems to move one direction. He frowned. You didn't come to me and say, Nora, I feel insecure living in a house I didn't bring into the marriage. You didn't say I'm ashamed of how much this bothers me. You didn't say I need to talk honestly about money and pride and what it does to me that this house is yours before it is ours. You let me think our marriage was going cold. You let me spend months wondering if you wanted out, and while I was trying to be gentle with that, you were asking what it would take to get around my no. That's not true. Mara's note says it is. That note says somebody asked some questions. Yes, I said, and your numbers say more, and your mother says more, and lunch says more, and the last 6 months say more. He looked at the paper with the renovation figures as if seeing it on the table had changed its nature. That was just math. Exactly. I leaned forward, then finally looking straight at him. Do you know what the cruelest part is? It isn't the card. It isn't even the call. It's that you kept calling me emotional because it sounded better than calling yourself entitled. The kitchen went very still. I could hear the tick of the clock above the back door. A car rolled slowly past outside. Somewhere down the block a child laughed once and then was quiet. Liam stared at me with a look I had not seen before, something between fury and disbelief, as if he had not understood until that moment that I was no longer standing inside the version of me he knew how to manage. You think this is entitlement, he said. I think you wanted access to something in my name badly enough that you were willing to let me doubt my own mind first. He stood up so suddenly the chair scraped hard against the floor. I am your husband. Yes, I said. You are. And that should have made you more careful with what was mine, not less. He turned away, ran both hands through his hair, then faced me again. So, what, that's it? We blow up our marriage because I asked questions about a house we live in together. The old me might have stumbled there at the word blow up, at the invitation to share blame for the explosion. But by then I could finally see the shape of the trap. If I stayed in the language of feelings, he would always claim more balance than I had. If I stayed in the language of procedure alone, he would act as though I were cold and legalistic. The truth sat in the middle, exactly where he never wanted it. No, I said. Our marriage is ending because you made my boundaries sound like instability, because you let your mother stand in my kitchen and talk about what should happen to my house while I was still standing there, because you were willing to treat my grief, my attachment, and my caution as defects to be managed, because you wanted me easier to move than the house. He opened his mouth, but there was nothing in it now I had not already heard in smaller forms. I stood up. You need to pack a bag tonight. He stared at me. You can't be serious. I am. This is insane. No, I said, and my voice did not shake. What was insane was making me feel irrational for wanting to keep one thing in this world that answered to my name. He laughed again, but there was no confidence in it this time, only a kind of brittle astonishment. You're throwing me out over paperwork. I picked up Mara's note and folded it carefully back into the estate folder. I'm asking you to leave because I know what the paperwork means. For a long moment he did not move. Then I watched something ugly and tired settle over his face, something much older than this argument, maybe older than me. Not remorse, not even shame exactly. More like the anger of a man denied a future he had started spending in his head. Fine, he said at last. If this is who you want to be. I thought of all the years I had spent being who other people found easiest. My mother gone. My grandmother practical to the bone. My younger self learning how to survive by trimming every reaction to a shape people could tolerate. Then I looked at him and said the truest thing I had said in that kitchen in a long time. I don't think you know who I am when I stop apologizing. He packed one duffel bag and left before 10. Not neatly, not nobly. There were a few slammed drawers upstairs, a muttered curse when he could not find a charger, one last stop in the kitchen where he stood like he might say something final enough to matter. But whatever he had imagined saying must have failed him. He walked past me with the bag in his hand and let himself out through the side door. I locked it after him. Then I stood with my hand on the knob longer than I needed to, breathing in the quiet. The house did not feel healed. That would have been too simple, too pretty. It felt shocked, disturbed, like a room after a hard truth has finally been spoken in it. I gathered the papers into the estate box except for the chipped key dish that I took from the shelf by the back door and carried outside with me. The steps were cool under my legs. Dusk had gone soft and blew over the alley. Someone 2 yards over had hung laundry late and a white sheet moved gently on the line like it was breathing. I set the key dish in my lap and ran my thumb over the crack along one edge, the one Grandma Evelyn had made years ago and refused to replace because, as she once said, a thing does not stop being useful because life got hold of it. I sat there until the air turned colder. The house made its old sounds around me, the faint settling pop from the dining room wall, the radiator clicking inside the far-off hum of a refrigerator that had outlasted 2 owners and 1 marriage. Tired sounds. Honest ones. I thought about my mother then, not in the sharp, broken way I used to when I was younger, but in the quieter way grief changes when it has lived with you long enough to stop demanding spectacle. And I thought about my grandmother bringing her keys home every night, setting them in this same chipped dish, believing in ordinary ownership with the seriousness of religion. For the first time since finding the card, I let myself cry. Not hard, not dramatically, just enough for the truth of it to pass through me. For the marriage I had kept hoping was sad instead of strategic. For the part of me that had needed so long to trust what she knew. For the humiliation of being interpreted out of my own life. For the strange mercy of no longer being confused. Across the alley, the sheet lifted again and fell. I looked back at the kitchen window, at the thin waviness in the old glass, at the light I'd left on above the sink, and I felt something settle inside me with the house. Not triumph. Something smaller, stronger. I had kept it, and at least for one quiet evening that was enough.